she whispered those words, "I don't want to be a virgin tonight," and the cowboy's hand trembled as he locked the door. But this isn't just another forbidden romance. This is a story about a woman who chose freedom over survival, and a broken man who learned that redemption doesn't come from a gun. It comes from giving someone else the choice he never had. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now, let me take you back to the winter of 1879, when two lost souls found each other in the unforgiving cold of Montana Territory. The wind that tore through Redemption, Montana that December evening didn't just bite, it carved. It peeled back layers of pretense, stripped away comfortable lies, and left only the raw truth of what a person was made of. Elias Ward felt that wind cut through his duster as he rode down the main street, his horse's breath forming clouds in the frozen air. And he wondered, not for the first time, if a man could ever truly outride his past, or if it simply waited in places like this, patient as winter itself. Redemption. The name was either a promise or a cruel joke, and Elias had lived long enough to know which one it probably was. The town looked like 100 others he'd passed through in the 5 years since he'd turned in his marshal's badge. Wooden buildings huddled against the cold, their windows glowing with lamplight that promised warmth, but rarely delivered. The saloon anchored one end of the street, the church the other, as if the town couldn't decide which institution would claim men's souls first. Elias had long since stopped believing either one had much use for his. He'd come here looking for work, maybe a quiet winter where his gun could stay holstered and his nightmares could fade to something manageable. The mining company up north was hiring security, or so the Telegraph had said. It wasn't lawman work. He'd sworn never to pin on a badge again after Sarah. But it was honest, and honest was about all he had left to offer. Elias dismounted outside the saloon, his legs stiff from 3 days in the saddle. He was 34 years old but felt older, the kind of age that came from carrying dead weight in your chest instead of your saddlebags. His face bore the weathered look of a man who'd spent more nights under stars than roofs, and his eyes, pale gray, the color of winter sky, had seen too much dying to ever look truly young again. The sound hit him the moment he pushed through the saloon doors. Laughter, but the wrong kind. Not the easy camaraderie of men sharing stories over whiskey, but the sharp, cutting laughter of a pack that had found something weak to torment. The saloon was typical frontier fare. Rough-hewn bar, sawdust on the floor, the smell of tobacco and unwashed bodies mixing with cheaper whiskey. A dozen men clustered near the bar, and they were all focused on something, someone, near the door. That's when Elias saw her. She stood with her back against the wall, one hand clutching a worn carpet bag, the other pressed against the rough timber as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with dark hair pulled back in a braid that had come half undone, and eyes that burned with something between defiance and terror. Her dress was quality once. You could see it in the cut and fabric, but it was travel-stained now, the hem muddy, one sleeve torn at the shoulder. But it was her face that stopped Elias cold. Not because she was beautiful, though she was in that fine-boned, fierce way that reminded him of wild horses that refused breaking. No, it was the expression she wore, proud and terrified and absolutely determined not to show either one. He'd seen that look before, years ago, on another young woman's face. His sister Sarah's face, the night she'd run away from their father's house seeking help that never came. "Come now, sweetheart," the barkeep was saying, his voice oozing false sympathy. "You got off that stage with no money, no ticket further, and no one waiting for you. Now the way I see it, you got 3 choices. Work upstairs until you earn your way somewhere else, marry whichever man here will have you, or freeze in the street tonight. Weather says it'll be below 0 by midnight." "I already told you no," the woman said, and her voice carried a refined edge that didn't match her desperate circumstances. Eastern educated, Elias thought, fallen far and fast. "I'm waiting for the morning stage." "With what money?" one of the miners called out. "You already said you spent your last dollar getting here." "That's my concern, not yours." "Everything's our concern in a town this size," the barkeep said, and there was an ugliness creeping into his tone now. "You're taking up space in my establishment. Either buy a drink, rent a room, or get out. It's 20 degrees outside. she said quietly. Then I guess you better decide quick which offer sounds best. The barkeep grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Or maybe you're holding out for a better deal. That it? Waiting to see if some rich rancher rides through looking for a wife? Hate to break it to you, darling, but you're damaged goods. Word travels fast out here. We all heard about what you did. The woman's face went white, but her chin lifted. I don't know what you've heard, but you ran out on Silas Croft on your wedding day, a skinny cowhand interrupted, laughing. Left him standing at the altar in Copper Falls with half the territory watching. Man paid good money for you, from what I heard. Pastor's daughter, wasn't you? Guess even the church sells what it's got when times get hard. I wasn't, she started, but another man cut her off. Crofts put out word he wants you back. $500 reward for anyone who returns his property. Now I'm thinking maybe we should just... I am not property. The words came out like iron, and for a moment the room actually quieted. The woman pushed off from the wall, standing straight despite the trembling in her hands. I don't care what contract that man thinks he bought. I don't care what my guardian signed. I am not property, and I will not be returned like a stolen horse. You want to try? Then do it. But I promise you I will make it difficult enough that your $500 won't begin to cover the trouble. There was a moment of surprised silence, and then the laughter started again, louder and meaner than before. Got some spirit in you, the barkeep said. Probably fetch a good price upstairs. Men like a fighter in bed. Makes it more interesting. Elias's hand tightened around his whiskey glass. He'd come in here for a quiet drink, information about the mining job, and a warm meal. He'd come here to mind his own business, keep his head down, and not get involved in anyone else's troubles. That's how you survived as a drifter. That's how you kept your past from catching up. But he couldn't stop seeing Sarah's face overlaid on this woman's. Couldn't stop hearing his sister's voice that last night. Elias, please. He's going to hurt me. The man father promised me to. He's cruel. I can't. I won't. And he'd said, Father's word is law. You'll go, and you'll make the best of it. 2 months later, Sarah was dead, beaten to death by the husband their father had sold her to for a land deal and a bottle of imported brandy. Elias had been wearing a marshal's badge then, upholding the law. The law said what that man did to his wife behind closed doors was his own business. The law said Sarah's contract was binding. The law said Elias had no right to interfere in a legal marriage. So Elias had taken off the badge, tracked down his brother-in-law, and put 3 bullets in him in a fair draw that barely qualified as legal. Then he'd ridden away and never stopped running from the memory of Sarah's face. Now here was another woman with that same desperate pride, that same trapped animal fear hidden behind false courage. And here were the same kind of men, circling like wolves, preparing to tear her down because she dared to say no. Elias set down his glass with deliberate care. Leave her be. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The laughter died as every head turned toward him. Elias stood up slowly, his duster falling open enough to show the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. It was worn smooth from use, the holster positioned for a quick draw, the mark of a man who'd lived by his gun long enough to be very good with it, or very dead. The barkeep's eyes narrowed. This ain't your business, stranger. I'm making it my business. You know who that woman is? What she's done? Don't care. Elias moved toward the door, his movements easy and unhurried, but his hand stayed near his gun. She said no. That ought to be enough. Croft's offering $500, one of the miners said. You planning to fight the whole territory over some runaway bride? If I have to. Elias looked at the woman, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and suspicion. Ma'am, I've got a cabin about 2 miles north of here. You'll have the bed, I'll take the floor. No strings, no payment. You can leave whenever you want, but if you stay here, these men will make your life hell until you break, and that's a fact. She studied him for a long moment, her intelligent eyes searching his face for the lie, the trap, the thing he really wanted. Elias kept his expression neutral, letting her look. He knew what she saw, a hard man with old scars and older regrets, but not the hungry look these other men wore. Why? She finally whispered. It was the same question Sarah had asked that last night. Why won't you help me? This time, Elias had an answer. because no one deserves to freeze for saying no. The woman's eyes glistened, but she blinked back whatever tears wanted to come. She nodded once, sharp and decisive, and picked up her carpet bag. All right. Now hold on. The barkeep started, but Elias turned on him with a look that had made outlaws reconsider their life choices. She's made her choice. Anyone here got a problem with that? We can settle it right now. The silence stretched out. Elias knew the calculation happening behind these men's eyes. $500 was good money, but a bullet was forever. And something about the way Elias stood, the coldness in his pale eyes, said he'd killed before and wouldn't lose sleep over doing it again. Finally, the barkeep spat into a brass spittoon. Get her out of here then, but when Croft's men come looking, and they will, you remember you brought this on yourself. I'll remember. Elias gestured toward the door. Ma'am? She walked past him, head high despite the hungry stares that followed her. Elias waited until she was outside, then backed toward the door himself, hand still near his gun. Only when he'd cleared the threshold did he turn his back on the room. Outside, the wind hit like a physical blow. The woman had stopped a few feet from the door, hugging herself against the cold. Up close, Elias could see she was younger than he'd first thought, and the weariness in her face went deeper than a few hard days of travel. Your horse? He asked. I don't have one. I used my last money for the stage ticket. Elias nodded and untied his mount. You can ride. I'll walk. It's only 2 miles. I can walk. In that dress? In this cold? He shook his head. You'll have frostbite before we make it halfway. Get up. She hesitated again, that same wariness flickering across her face. But the wind gusted hard enough to make her stagger, and survival won out over suspicion. Elias helped her up, his hands careful and impersonal, then took the reins and started walking north. For the first mile, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the crunch of snow under his boots, the horse's breathing, and the wind that seemed determined to strip the warmth from every living thing. Elias kept his pace steady but not punishing, aware that the woman above him was already exhausted. Finally, she broke the silence. You didn't ask my name. Figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know it. A pause. Nora Hale. Elias Ward. Another long silence, then, why did you really do that back there? Men don't help women without wanting something. Some do. I've never met one. Elias glanced up at her, seeing the brittleness in her expression, the look of someone who'd learned too young that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Then you've been meeting the wrong kind of men. The only kind there are. He didn't have an answer for that, so he just kept walking. The cabin came into view as they crested a low rise, a small structure with a stone chimney set back in a stand of pine trees that offered some shelter from the wind. It wasn't much, but it was sturdy and weatherproof, built by someone who knew what Montana winters demanded. Elias tied the horse in the lean-to he'd constructed, making sure the animal had feed and water. When he turned back, Nora was still sitting on the horse, staring at the cabin with an expression he couldn't quite read. What is it? He asked. I'm trying to decide if I'm about to make a terrible mistake. You are, Elias said bluntly. Way I see it, you got 2 terrible choices. Trust me or freeze in that saloon. Neither one's good, but at least out here, if I turn out to be lying, you can scream as loud as you want, and I won't have an audience cheering me on. It was harsh, but it was honest. Nora looked down at him for a long moment, then slid off the horse. I suppose that's something. Elias unlocked the cabin door and pushed it open. The interior was cold, but not frozen. He'd banked the fire before leaving that morning. I'll get the fire going. There's a blanket over there you can use while your dress dries. He moved around the single room with practiced efficiency, building up the fire until flames crackled and heat began to push back the cold. The cabin was sparse but clean. A bed in one corner with a real mattress, a table with 2 chairs, a stove for cooking, shelves with basic supplies. Elias's saddlebags and bedroll were stacked neatly near the door. Nora stood uncertainly near the entrance, still clutching her carpet bag. You said I could have the bed. That's right. And you'll sleep where? Floor. I've got a bedroll. Elias pulled it out and tossed it near the fire to prove his point. You can use that blanket hung on the wall to change behind if you want privacy. I need to check on the horse. Make sure the cold didn't damage any of my gear." He stepped back outside before she could respond, giving her space and time. The cold bit at him immediately, but Elias welcomed it. He'd been truthful about checking his gear, but mostly he wanted to give Nora time to realize he wasn't going to pressure her, wasn't going to push into her space, wasn't going to demand payment for basic human decency. He took his time, grooming the horse, checking all the tack, reorganizing his saddlebags. When he finally returned to the cabin, he made plenty of noise so she'd hear him coming. Inside, Nora had draped her dress over one of the chairs near the fire and wrapped herself in his spare blanket. Her hair was down now, falling past her shoulders in waves that caught the firelight. She looked younger without the severe braid, and more vulnerable, but there was still that edge of steel in her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. Elias shrugged off his duster and hung it on a peg. "You hungry?" "Starving." He pulled out some hardtack, dried beef, and a can of peaches. Frontier fare, but better than nothing. As he worked, Nora watched him with that same assessing gaze, and he could feel the weight of her suspicion. She was waiting for him to show his true colors, to reveal what he really wanted from her. Elias understood that kind of vigilance. He'd lived it himself after Sarah died, unable to trust, unable to rest, always waiting for the next betrayal. It was exhausting, but it kept you alive. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them. Elias kept his distance, sitting on the opposite side of the small room, making himself as unthreatening as possible. When they'd finished, he collected the tin plates and set them aside to clean in the morning. "You should sleep," he said. "You look dead on your feet." Nora didn't argue. She moved to the bed, then paused. "What about you?" "I'm not tired yet. Going to sit up a while, make sure the fire doesn't die." It was partly true. Elias rarely slept well anymore. Too many ghosts visited him in the dark. But mostly he wanted Nora to feel safe enough to actually rest, and that meant staying awake and unthreatening on the far side of the room. She slid under the blankets, and Elias deliberately turned his back, settling near the fire with his rifle across his knees. Not for her, for whatever might come looking. If the men in that saloon decided $500 was worth the risk, or if Croft had men nearby. An hour passed, then 2. The fire burned low, and Elias fed it carefully, keeping the warmth steady. Behind him, he could hear Nora's breathing even out, slipping towards sleep but not quite reaching it. She was still afraid, still waiting for him to attack. "Mr. Ward?" Her voice was small in the darkness. "Elias is fine." A pause. "Why do you live alone out here?" "Long story." "I'm not sleeping anyway." Elias was quiet for a moment, debating. Then, "I was a marshal once, in Kansas. Did things by the book, believed the law mattered, thought justice and legality were the same thing. What changed? I had a sister, Sarah. Our father promised her to a man, not a good man, but a rich one. She begged me to help her, to use my badge to stop it. I told her the law said the contract was binding." He stared into the fire, seeing Sarah's face in the flames. 2 months after the wedding, her husband beat her to death. The law said that was his right, that what happened in a man's home was his business. Nora drew in a sharp breath. "So I took off my badge, tracked him down, and shot him dead in the street. Then I rode out and never went back." Elias's voice was flat, emotionless. The only way he could tell the story. "That was 5 years ago. Been drifting ever since, trying to figure out if there's any difference between law and justice, or if they're just 2 words for the same rotten thing." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. "I'm sorry," Nora whispered. "Don't be. I made my choices. She died because of them." He turned slightly, not looking at her directly, but speaking into the space between them. "But I learned something from it. Learned that sometimes the law is wrong, and sometimes the only justice worth having is the kind you make yourself. So when I saw those men circling you tonight, saw them trying to break you down because you dared to say no," he shook his head. "I couldn't walk away. Not again. I'm not your sister." "No. But you're someone's sister, someone's daughter, someone who deserves better than being sold like livestock and hunted down when you run." Nora was quiet for a long time. Then, so softly he almost missed it. "I was raised by a pastor after my parents died. He was kind when I was young, but when I turned 17 and his wife passed, he changed. Started talking about duty and obligation. Started touching my hand too long at dinner. Started looking at me in ways that made my skin crawl. Elias felt his jaw tighten, but he said nothing, letting her speak. When I turned 21, he told me he'd arranged a marriage. Silas Croft, a rancher from Copper Falls. Old enough to be my father, and mean besides. Everyone knew what happened to his first wife. Fell down the stairs was what they said, but there were bruises that didn't match the story. But Croft was rich, and the church needed money, so he sold you. The pastor called it securing my future. Said I should be grateful. Said Croft would provide for me, protect me. Her voice turned bitter. I stood there at that altar, looking at the man I was supposed to promise my life to, and I saw my death in his eyes. So I ran, took the money I'd saved from sewing work, caught the stage, and just kept going until I couldn't go anymore. That's how you ended up in redemption. End of the line, literally. I used my last coins to get here thinking maybe I could find work, disappear into a town where no one knew me. But word travels faster than stages out here. They knew who I was before I even stepped off. Elias turned to look at her then. In the firelight, her face was drawn and exhausted, but there was something unbowed in her expression, a core of strength that hadn't been broken despite everything she'd endured. You did the right thing, he said firmly, running from that. Don't let anyone tell you different. The law says I'm his property, says that contract is binding. Then the law is wrong, just like it was wrong about Sarah. Elias held her gaze. I won't let them take you, not without a fight. You don't even know me. Don't have to. Some things are just right or wrong, and forcing a woman into a marriage she doesn't want is wrong, simple as that. Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks then, but she didn't sob or break. She just let them fall, silent and exhausted. I don't know how to trust you. I know. Every man I've ever known has wanted something from me. My guardian wanted me silent and obedient. Croft wanted a possession. Those men in the saloon wanted... She shuddered. I don't even know what to call what they wanted. That's fair. Elias turned back to the fire. You don't have to trust me, Miss Hale. You just have to survive tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out the next step. After that, the next one. That's all anyone can do. Survive until they can do better. And what do you want? Really? Elias considered the question carefully. I want to sleep without dreaming about my sister's funeral. I want to stop seeing her face every time I close my eyes. I want to believe that maybe I can do one thing right, help one person the way I failed to help her. That's what I want. Your company's got nothing to do with it. It was the truth, raw and ungarnished. Nora studied him for a long moment, then slowly lay back down. All right, she said quietly. I'll try to sleep. Good. Elias sat vigil through the night, feeding the fire, listening to the wind howl around the cabin walls, and thinking about justice and law and the thin line between them. Sometime near dawn, Nora's breathing finally deepened into true sleep, and he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. She'd trusted him enough to let her guard down. It was a start. When morning light began filtering through the cabin's single window, Elias finally let himself doze, his rifle still across his lap, his back against the wall. He was aware, on some level, of Nora waking, of her moving quietly around the cabin, of her stopping to look at him where he sat. He kept his eyes closed, giving her the freedom to observe him without the pressure of his attention. Let her see that he'd kept his word, that she'd slept in the bed while he'd taken the floor, that nothing had been touched, that her trust hadn't been violated. When he finally opened his eyes, the sun was higher and Nora was dressed, her hair rebraided, sitting at the small table with a cup of water. She met his gaze without flinching. Morning, she said. Morning. Elias stood, feeling his joints protest. He wasn't as young as he used to be, and a night on the floor reminded him of it. There's coffee if you want it. Not fancy, but it's hot. I made some already. It's on the stove. He poured himself a cup and was surprised to find it good, strong and bitter, the way he liked it. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to help. You gave me shelter. The least I can do is make coffee. Elias nodded, accepting this. He'd learned long ago that some people needed to give something back, needed to balance the scales even when no debt was owed. If making coffee made Nora feel less helpless, he wouldn't take that from her. They ate a simple breakfast, more hardtack and some bacon Elias fried up. And as they ate, Nora began to talk. Not about her past this time, but about smaller things. She asked about the cabin, about Montana, about winter survival. Elias answered her questions, and slowly, carefully, something like conversation began to form between them. "I should warn you," Elias said as he cleaned the breakfast dishes, "those men in town will probably spread word about where you are. If Croft's men are nearby, they could come looking." "I know. So you've got a choice to make. You can stay here. Let me help you figure out a real plan for getting somewhere safe. Or you can take my horse, head further west. Try your luck in a bigger town where you might disappear easier." Nora was quiet, considering. "If I take your horse, you'll be stuck here with no way to travel. I'll manage. And if I stay, then we figure it out together. I've got some savings, enough to buy you passage on a stage, set you up somewhere new if you want, or enough to pay for legal help if you want to fight the contract." He paused. "Either way, the choice is yours. I'm not going to tell you what to do." "Because?" "Because you've had enough of men making your decisions for you." Nora's eyes glistened again, but she blinked it back. "I'll stay. For now. Until we have a real plan." "All right, then." And so it began. This strange arrangement between two people who had every reason not to trust each other but had run out of other options. Elias went about his usual routines, tending the horse, checking the cabin for repairs, and Nora found ways to help. She mended the tear in his duster with surprising skill, cooked meals that were better than anything he'd made himself, and slowly, carefully, began to claim a small space in the cabin as her own. They talked, but not constantly. Long silences stretched between them, but they weren't uncomfortable. Elias told her about his time as a marshal, about the frontier towns and the men he'd hunted. Nora spoke of her childhood before her parents died, before the pastor's house, of dreams she'd had of becoming a teacher. "Could still do that," Elias said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Teachers are always needed out here. If you got away safe, got set up somewhere new, you could—" "Could I?" Nora interrupted. "With Croft's men hunting me? With my name ruined? I'm a runaway bride, Elias. That's not the kind of woman schools hire to teach children. Plenty of places out west where no one cares what happened back east." "Maybe," but she didn't sound convinced. 3 days passed this way, then 4. The wind kept blowing, the snow kept falling, and the cabin became a small island of warmth and something like safety. Elias found himself looking forward to their evening conversations, to the way Nora would challenge his cynical observations with her own sharp intelligence, to the rare moments when she smiled and looked young again. He was careful, always careful, to maintain proper distance. He slept by the fire, gave her privacy, never touched her except when absolutely necessary. And Nora, for her part, seemed to relax incrementally, the tension in her shoulders easing degree by degree. On the 5th morning, Elias woke to find her already up, making breakfast. But something was different. He could feel it in the air, a shift, a change. "We need to talk," Nora said without preamble. Elias sat up, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. That's the problem." She turned to face him, her expression troubled. "You've been nothing but kind to me. You've kept your word about everything, and I find myself trusting you, which terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I don't know how. Trust, I mean. Every time I've trusted someone, they've hurt me. My guardian. The people in Copper Falls who knew what Croft was and let me be sold to him anyway. The pastor who raised me and then treated me like property." Her voice shook slightly. "How do I know you're different? How do I know this isn't just another trap?" Elias stood slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. "You don't. There's no way to know for certain. Trust is always a risk." "That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. It's just true." He moved to pour himself coffee, giving her space. "But here's what I can tell you. I'm not asking for your trust. I'm not asking for anything. You can leave whenever you want, take whatever you need from here, and I won't stop you. But if you stay, it'll be because you chose to, not because you had no other choice. Everyone always has an angle." "Maybe. Elias leaned against the wall, cradling his coffee. Or maybe some people are just tired of making the wrong choices and trying to do better. I failed my sister. I can't change that. But I can make sure I don't fail someone else the same way. Nora stared at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she crossed the room and did something that shocked them both. She hugged him. Not sensually, not desperately, but the way a drowning person might grab a piece of driftwood, with gratitude and relief and hope all tangled together. Elias froze, his body rigid with surprise. Then, very carefully, he set down his coffee and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. Not tightly, not possessively, just holding her, offering support without demanding anything in return. "Thank you," Nora whispered against his chest, "for seeing me as a person instead of property. That's the bare minimum of human decency. Out here, that's rare as gold." They stood like that for a long moment, and Elias felt something shift inside him, some part of the wall he'd built around his heart after Sarah's death beginning to crack. This wasn't about attraction or desire. This was about two broken people finding unexpected sanctuary in each other's honesty. When Nora finally pulled back, her eyes were dry but bright. "I want to stay. Help me figure out how to disappear properly, how to become someone Croft can't find." "All right, we'll make a plan." But plans, Elias had learned, rarely survived contact with reality. And reality came knocking 3 days later in the form of hoofbeats outside the cabin and rough voices calling into the winter dark. "Elias Ward! We know you're in there! We know you've got Croft's woman!" Elias's hand went to his gun, even as Nora's face went white with terror. Through the window, he could see 3 riders, all armed, all watching the cabin with predatory patience. "Send her out," one of the riders called, "and maybe we let you live." Elias looked at Nora, saw the fear and resignation beginning to form on her face, the look of someone who'd always known this moment would come. "No," he said firmly. "What?" "I said no." He checked his rifle, his movements calm and practiced. "You don't belong to Croft. You don't belong to anyone. And I'll be damned if I hand you over to men like that." "Elias, there are 3 of them." "I know." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Stay away from the windows. If shooting starts, get down and stay down. Understand?" Nora nodded, her face pale but determined. Elias took a deep breath, said a silent prayer to a god he wasn't sure he believed in anymore, and stepped out into the cold Montana night to face the men who'd come to take away someone's choice. The cold hit Elias like a fist as he stepped onto the porch, the frozen air burning his lungs with each breath. 3 riders sat motionless in the snow, their horses' breath forming clouds in the lamplight spilling from the cabin windows. They were hard men, the kind who hired out their guns and didn't ask questions about whose blood they were spilling as long as the money was good. The one in the middle was older, maybe 40, with a scar running from his eye to his jaw. He wore a thick bearskin coat and sat his horse like a man who'd spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it. His companions flanked him on either side, one tall and lean with a rifle across his saddle, the other shorter and thick through the shoulders, his hand resting easy on the pistol at his hip. "That's far enough, Ward," Scarface said. "We're not here for trouble, just here to collect what belongs to Mr. Croft." "Nothing here belongs to Croft," Elias replied, his voice carrying across the frozen distance between them. His rifle hung loose in his right hand, pointed at the ground but ready to rise in a heartbeat. "You boys should ride on while you still can." The lean one laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's funny. 3 of us, 1 of you, and you're giving us warnings? Maybe that time as a marshal made you stupid. You know who I am, then you know I don't bluff." Elias's voice stayed level, conversational almost, but there was iron underneath. "Last chance. Turn around." "Can't do that," Scarface said, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone. "Croft's paying $500 for the woman, plus another $200 for whoever brings her in. That's good money, Ward. More than any of us will see in 6 months of regular work. Now I'm willing to split it with you. Say $200 for your trouble and you look the other way. That's fair, isn't it?" "No." "Then I guess we do this the hard way." Scarface's hand moved toward his gun, and time seemed to slow the way it always did before violence. Elias's rifle came up smooth and fast, years of practice making the movement as natural as breathing. The first shot took Scarface in the shoulder, spinning him sideways in his saddle. The lean one was raising his rifle when Elias's second shot punched through his hand, sending the weapon tumbling into the snow. The third man got his pistol clear and fired, the bullet whining past Elias's ear so close he felt the wind of its passage. Elias dove behind the thick pine posts supporting the porch roof, chambering another round. Return fire chewed splinters from the wood, and one of the horses screamed and bolted. Through the chaos, Elias could hear Scarface shouting orders, his voice tight with pain. "Circle around! Get to the back!" The stocky one spurred his horse toward the cabin's rear, while his wounded companion tried to control his panicked mount one-handed. Elias snapped a shot at the circling rider, missed, cursed. If they got around back, they could trap him in a crossfire, and then it wouldn't matter how fast he was. The cabin door flew open behind him, and Nora's voice cut through the gunfire. "Elias, down!" He dropped flat without thinking, trusting her completely in that moment. Something whistled over his head, and there was a sound like a hammer hitting meat. The stocky rider jerked backward, clutching at his chest where the handle of a kitchen knife now protruded. He swayed, made a gurgling sound, and toppled from his saddle into the snow. Elias was up and moving before the man hit the ground, racing toward the lean one who was trying to get his rifle from the snow with his mangled hand. The man looked up just in time to see Elias's rifle butt coming at his face. The impact sent him sprawling, unconscious before he landed. That left Scarface, who'd managed to stay mounted despite the shoulder wound. He had his pistol in his left hand now, awkward but functional, and was trying to line up a shot while controlling his nervous horse with his knees. Blood soaked the front of his coat, dark and spreading. "Don't," Elias said, his rifle trained on the man's chest. "You're bleeding bad. You ride away now. You might make it to a doctor. You keep fighting. You'll die in this snow." Scarface's face was pale with shock and blood loss, but his eyes still held calculation. "Croft won't stop. He'll send more men. He'll keep sending them until he gets her back, or until you're both dead. That's who he is. Then I guess he'll need a lot of men." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the blood-stained snow. Then Scarface's gun hand wavered and slowly lowered. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Ward." "Maybe both." Elias gestured with his rifle. "Get your friends and go. The one Nora stuck probably won't make it, but you can try. Tell Croft that Nora Hale isn't property and isn't coming back. Tell him if he sends more men, they'll end up like you, bleeding in the snow with nothing to show for it." Scarface looked at him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll tell him." But he won't listen. Men like Croft, they don't hear nothing but what they want to hear. He turned his horse with difficulty, favoring his wounded shoulder. "You're a dead man, Ward. You just don't know it yet." "Been dead before. Didn't take." Elias watched as Scarface collected his unconscious companion, leaving the stocky one where he'd fallen, and rode slowly into the darkness. When the hoofbeats finally faded, Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Behind him, Nora stood in the doorway, her face ghost white, her hands trembling. She stared at the dead man in the snow, at the blood black against white, at the knife she'd thrown with desperate accuracy. "I killed him," she whispered. "You saved my life." Elias moved toward her carefully, the way you'd approach a spooked horse. "Nora, look at me. Look at me, not him." Her eyes snapped to his face, wide and shocked. "You did what you had to do. He came here to take you by force, to drag you back to a man who would have hurt you. You defended yourself. That's not murder. That's survival." I didn't think I could." Her words tumbled over each other, her breath coming too fast. Elias recognized the signs of shock setting in. He guided her back inside, sitting her near the fire while he quickly barred the door and checked the windows. Then he poured whiskey into a tin cup and pressed it into her shaking hands. "Drink. All of it." She obeyed mechanically, coughing as the alcohol burned down her throat. Some of the color returned to her face, but her eyes still held that 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing violence up close for the first time. "I need to deal with the body," Elias said quietly. "Can't leave it there. Will you be all right here for a few minutes?" Nora nodded, not trusting her voice. Elias squeezed her shoulder once, gentle, reassuring, then went back outside into the cold. The work was grim and necessary. He dragged the body into the trees, marking the spot so he could bury it properly when the ground thawed. The man's horse had fled, but it hadn't gone far, standing nervously at the edge of the clearing. Elias caught it easily, stripping off the saddle and gear before setting it loose. Maybe it would find its way to town. Maybe wolves would get it. Either way, it wasn't his problem. The blood in the snow was the worst part. Dark pools that steamed in the frozen air, evidence of violence that couldn't be hidden. Elias did what he could, kicking fresh snow over the worst of it, but come morning the stains would still be visible. Another mark on his conscience, another choice that couldn't be undone. When he finally returned to the cabin, nearly an hour had passed. Nora sat exactly where he'd left her, staring into the fire. The whiskey cup was empty beside her. "We need to leave," she said without looking at him. "Tonight. Now. Before Croft sends more men." "We will, but not tonight." Elias hung up his coat and moved to warm his hands by the fire. "Those horses left clear tracks, and anyone following them will expect us to run. So we stay put tonight, rest, plan properly. Tomorrow we move, but we do it smart." "Smart?" Nora's laugh was brittle. "A man is dead in your woods because of me. 3 more will tell Croft exactly where I am. How is any of this smart? The man in the woods is dead because he tried to kidnap you at gunpoint. The 3 who lived will tell Croft that taking you won't be easy or cheap. That buys us time." Elias sat down across from her, his elbows on his knees, his voice patient. "I know you're scared. You should be. But running blind into a winter night is how people die. We need supplies, a destination, a plan that's better than just hoping we can outrun men on horses. So what do? We head north. There's a ranch about 3 days' ride from here, belongs to my brother Jacob. We haven't spoken in years, not since Sarah died, but blood's blood. He'll help us, even if he hates me for it. From there, we can figure out the next step." "Your brother," Nora repeated slowly. "The one you haven't spoken to in 5 years? That's your plan? You got a better one?" She didn't answer because they both knew she didn't. After a long silence, she said quietly, "Tell me about him. Your brother." Elias was quiet for a moment, organizing memories he'd spent years trying to forget. "Jacob's 3 years older than me. Serious, responsible, everything our father wanted in a son. He stayed on the family ranch in Wyoming, took care of Ma after Pa died, did everything right." His voice went flat. "After Sarah died, Jacob said it was my fault. Said if I'd just enforced the law like I was supposed to, she'd still be alive. Said I was selfish for thinking I could play God and decide which laws mattered and which didn't. Was he right? Probably." Elias looked at her directly. "I did kill her husband. That was murder, no matter how I try to justify it. And I did abandon my badge, my duty, everything I swore to uphold. Jacob wasn't wrong about that. But he also stood by while our father sold Sarah to a monster, so his moral high ground is built on some pretty shaky foundation." Nora was quiet, processing this. "And you think he'll help us despite all that?" "I think Jacob's a hard man, but he's not cruel. He won't turn away a woman in danger, even if he has to help his worthless little brother to do it." Elias managed a tired smile. "Besides, he's got the one thing we need most right now, distance. Croft's operation is centered around Copper Falls, about 200 miles south of here. Jacob's ranch is north, closer to the Canadian border. It's not perfect, but it's something. And after that, we just keep running forever? Maybe. Or maybe we figure out a way to end this that doesn't involve running." Elias stood and moved to his saddlebags, pulling out a leather-bound journal and a pencil. "For now, we plan. I need you to tell me everything you know about Croft, his operation, his men, his habits. Knowledge is the only weapon we've got right now." So they talked deep into the night, Nora recounting every detail she could remember about the man she'd fled from. Croft was methodical, she said, a planner. He'd built his cattle empire through a combination of shrewd business and ruthless violence, buying up smaller ranches when he could and burning them out when he couldn't. He had connections to the territorial government, judges who owed him favors, lawmen on his payroll. "He sees it as a matter of pride now," Nora explained, her voice weary. "It's not really about me anymore. It's about the fact that I embarrassed him. He stood at that altar with half the territory watching, and I ran. That kind of humiliation, men like Croft don't forgive it. Then we'll have to make sure he doesn't get the chance to collect. Elias closed the journal, his mind already working through possibilities. Get some sleep. We've got hard riding ahead tomorrow. But sleep didn't come easily for either of them that night. Elias dozed fitfully by the fire, his rifle across his knees, jerking awake at every sound. And Nora lay in the bed staring at the ceiling, seeing the dead man's face every time she closed her eyes. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, she spoke into the darkness. Elias? Yeah? I'm not sorry I killed him. Is that wrong? Shouldn't I feel guilty? Elias considered this carefully before answering. You feel what you feel. There's no right or wrong to it. Some people kill, and it breaks them. Some people kill, and it doesn't. That doesn't make you good or evil. It just makes you someone who survived. You sound like you speak from experience. I do. I've killed 7 men, Nora. Some in fair fights, some not. Some I lost sleep over. Some I didn't. The one I feel worst about wasn't even my bullet. It was my inaction. Sarah died because I didn't act soon enough, didn't protect her when I should have. The men I shot, they chose their path. But Sarah, she just wanted someone to choose her. Nora was quiet for a long time. Then, thank you for choosing me. Wasn't really a choice. Couldn't have lived with myself otherwise. Dawn came cold and gray, the sky the color of old steel. Elias was up before the sun, checking their supplies, preparing for travel. They had enough food for a few days if they were careful, and his horse was strong enough to carry them both if they took it slow. It would be hard travel in winter, but it was possible. Nora emerged from the cabin dressed in her traveling clothes, the dress she'd arrived in now covered by a spare coat of Elias's that hung too large on her frame. She'd braided her hair tight and pinned it up, her face set with determination that hadn't been there the night before. I want to learn to shoot, she said without preamble. Elias paused in cinching the saddle. What? You heard me. I want to learn to shoot. If more men come, I need to be able to defend myself. I can't rely on throwing knives every time. You did pretty well with the knife. I got lucky. Next time I might not be. Not. She crossed her arms, her jaw set. I'm not going to be helpless anymore, Elias. You taught me something last night, that I'm capable of violence when I need to be. Now teach me how to control it. Elias studied her for a moment, seeing the steel beneath the fear. This was what strength looked like. Not the absence of terror, but the decision to act despite it. He nodded slowly and pulled his pistol from its holster, checking to make sure it was unloaded before handing it to her. First rule, always assume a gun is loaded until you've checked it yourself. Second rule, never point it at anything you're not willing to kill. Third rule, if you draw it, you use it. No threats, no warnings. You decide to kill, and you do it fast and clean. Understand? Nora took the gun, her hand steady despite its weight. I understand. They spent an hour in the clearing behind the cabin, Elias teaching her the basics. Stance, grip, sight picture, trigger control. She was a natural student, focused and attentive, asking questions when she didn't understand. When they finally loaded the pistol and she fired her first shot, the recoil surprised her, but her second shot was steadier, and her third steadier still. You're a quick learner, Elias said, impressed despite himself. I'm motivated. She ejected the spent shells, her movements growing more confident. Again. They practiced until the ammunition ran low, then packed up and prepared to ride. Elias gave the cabin one last look, knowing he'd probably never return. It had been home for 3 months, a place of quiet and solitude. Now it was marked by violence, and men would come looking. Another place he couldn't go back to. Another piece of his life that had to be abandoned. You ready? He asked Nora. She nodded, her face pale but determined. As I'll ever be. The ride north was brutal. The temperature dropped as they climbed into higher country, and the wind cut through their clothes like knives. Elias kept them moving at a steady pace, not so fast that they'd exhaust the horse, but not so slow that any pursuit could catch them easily. They stopped rarely, eating in the saddle, speaking only when necessary. Nora bore it all without complaint. She rode behind Elias, her arms around his waist for balance and warmth, and he could feel her shivering against his back. But when he asked if she needed to stop, she always refused. She was proving something to herself, he realized, that she was strong enough, tough enough to survive whatever came. They made camp the first night in a grove of pine trees that offered some shelter from the wind. Elias built a small fire, small enough for warmth but not so large it would give away their position, and they huddled close to it, sharing what little food they had. "Tell me something," Nora said as they ate. "Something that isn't about death or running or survival. Tell me something normal." Elias thought for a moment. "My mother used to make apple pie every Sunday after church. Best thing I've ever tasted. Sarah and I would fight over who got the biggest slice, and Jacob would always end up getting it because he was oldest, and Ma said that was only fair." "Did you resent him for that?" "Every single week." Elias smiled at the memory. "But then he'd always split it with us when Ma wasn't looking. That was Jacob, by the book in public, but soft-hearted when no one was watching. Pa used to say that would be his downfall someday, that kindness. Sounds like a good quality to have. Out here? Gets you killed." But Elias's voice was gentle when he said it. "Your turn. Tell me something normal." Nora was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Before my parents died, we lived in Philadelphia. My father was a professor, my mother a pianist. Every evening after dinner, she'd play and he'd read aloud. Poetry, mostly. Whitman, Dickinson, Poe. I'd sit on the floor and just listen to their voices mixing together, music and words." Her voice went soft with memory. "I thought that's what love looked like. Two people creating something beautiful together, not because they had to, but because they wanted to." "That's a good memory." "It's also a lie." Nora's voice turned bitter. "Because they died and left me alone. And every relationship I've seen since then has been about power and possession. My guardian controlled me through obligation. Croft tried to buy me like livestock. Those men at the saloon saw me as something to be used and discarded. Where's the beauty in any of that?" Elias poked at the fire, considering his words carefully. "Maybe the problem isn't that love doesn't exist. Maybe it's that we've been looking at the wrong examples. Your parents, that was real. What Croft tried to do to you, that's not love. That's ownership. They're not the same thing, no matter what men like him claim. How do you know the difference? Love gives you choices. Ownership takes them away." He looked at her directly. "That's why I keep asking what you want to do, where you want to go. Because you're not my property to command. You're a person with agency, and that matters." Nora's eyes glistened in the firelight. "No one's ever treated me that way before. Like my choices actually matter. Then everyone you've met before me has been a fool." They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them, and something shifted in the air around them. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Two damaged people seeing each other clearly without pretense or expectation, and finding something unexpected. Respect. The second day of travel was worse than the first. The temperature dropped further, and snow began falling in the afternoon, thick and heavy. Elias pushed them harder, knowing they needed to find shelter before the storm hit in earnest. Just as darkness was falling, they crested a ridge and saw it. A line shack, one of the small cabins ranchers built for cowboys watching cattle in remote pastures. It was abandoned for the winter, but the door was unlocked and the structure sound. Elias got Nora inside, then spent a frigid half-hour taking care of the horse in the lean-to attached to the shack. When he finally came back inside, his fingers were so numb he could barely work the buttons on his coat. Nora was already building a fire in the small stove, her movements efficient despite her own exhaustion. "Sit down," she ordered. "Let me see your hands." Elias obeyed, too cold to argue. She took his hands in hers, rubbing them gently to restore circulation, her touch practical and unself-conscious. He found himself watching her face in the firelight, the concentration in her eyes, the slight furrow of her brow, the way she bit her lower lip when she was focused on a task. "They're warming up," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. She looked up, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved, caught in something neither could name. Then Nora released his hands and turned back to the fire, but he could see the color rising in her cheeks. "We should eat," she said, not looking at him. "Keep our strength up." They made a simple meal from their dwindling supplies, And as they ate, the storm outside intensified. Wind howled around the shack, driving snow against the windows, creating a sense of isolation that was both comforting and claustrophobic. They were alone here, cut off from the world, and the cabin seemed to shrink around them. "Tell me about your scar," Nora said suddenly. "The one on your chest. I saw it when you were washing up earlier." Elias's hand went unconsciously to his chest, where the old knife wound left a jagged line across his ribs. "Card game in Dodge City, about 2 years ago. Fellow thought I was cheating. I wasn't, and decided to settle it with a blade instead of words. He got that hit in before I put him down." "You killed him?" "No, just broke his arm and walked away. Sometimes living is punishment enough." Elias pulled off his shirt to show her the scar properly, the puckered flesh pale against his tanned skin. "Healed badly because I was too stubborn to see a doctor. Hurts when the weather changes, reminds me I'm not as quick as I used to be." Nora reached out, her fingers hovering near the scar but not quite touching. "Does it hurt now?" "Always hurts a little. Part of getting old." He pulled his shirt back on, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. "We should sleep. Long day tomorrow if the storm clears." But sleep felt impossible in that small space, with the storm raging outside and the heat from the stove making the air thick and close. Elias lay on the floor near the door, his rifle beside him, but he could hear Nora shifting restlessly in the bunk, unable to find comfort. "Elias?" Her voice was small in the darkness. "What is it?" "I'm scared." "I know. Not of Croft, not of his men. I'm scared of this, of trusting you, of what happens when I let my guard down and you turn out to be just like every other man who's promised to help me." Elias sat up, looking toward where she lay in the darkness. "Can't promise you I won't let you down, Nora. Everyone fails sometime, but I can promise I'll never deliberately hurt you, never force you, never treat you as anything less than a person deserving respect. That's all I've got to offer. That's more than anyone else has offered." He heard her move, sitting up in the bunk. "I had nightmares last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man I killed. Saw the knife going in, saw the blood. It should bother me more than it does, shouldn't it? No right or wrong way to feel about it. You keep saying that, but I don't know if I believe you. I killed a man, Elias. Took a life. Doesn't that make me a murderer?" "Makes you a survivor. There's a difference." He stood and moved closer, sitting on the floor near the bunk so they could talk without shouting across the room. "Listen to me. That man came to take you by force, to drag you back to someone who would have hurt you. You didn't start that fight. He did. You just finished it. That's not murder. That's justice." "The law wouldn't see it that way." "Then the law is wrong. Just like it was wrong about Sarah." His voice hardened. "I'm done pretending that legal and moral are the same thing. Sometimes you have to break the law to do what's right. Sometimes the only justice available is the kind you make yourself." Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not making me feel broken. For treating me like I'm strong instead of damaged." She shifted in the bunk, and in the dim light from the dying fire, he could see her face, young and exhausted and fiercely determined. "Everyone else sees me as something to be fixed or saved or possessed. You see me as someone capable of saving myself." "That's because you are." "I'm starting to believe that. Because of you." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with significance neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the small cabin, something else was building, not romance exactly, but something deeper, trust, understanding, the fragile beginning of a connection that went beyond simple gratitude or duty. "We should sleep," Elias said again, but he didn't move from where he sat. "Stay there," Nora said suddenly. "Just stay where I can hear you breathing. I sleep better when I know someone's watching." So Elias stayed, his back against the wall, his rifle across his lap, listening to Nora's breathing gradually slow and deepen into sleep. And he thought about Sarah, about all the ways he'd failed her, and about this second chance he'd been given to do better. He wouldn't waste it. Morning came with silence. The storm had passed, leaving the world wrapped in fresh snow that sparkled in the weak sunlight. They ate a cold breakfast, packed their meager supplies, and prepared to continue north. Elias estimated they were still 2 days from Jacob's ranch, maybe less if they pushed hard. "Do you really think your brother will help us?" Nora asked as they rode out into the pristine landscape. "Honestly, I don't know. Jacob's proud, and I wounded that pride when I left. But he's also a good man underneath all the stubborn righteousness. If we can get past his anger at me, he'll do the right thing. He always does. And if he doesn't, then we keep moving. Canada's not that much further north. Fresh start, new names. Croft's reach doesn't extend that far." Elias urged the horse forward through the snow. "Either way, we'll figure it out. We've come this far, haven't we?" And the third morning dawned clear and cold. By afternoon, they could see the smoke from Jacob's ranch house rising in the distance, and Elias felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He was coming home, in a way. Or at least returning to the last place that had felt like home before everything fell apart. "That's it?" Nora asked, pointing to the cluster of buildings visible across the snow-covered valley. "That's it. The Ward family ranch. Where I grew up. Where Sarah grew up. Where everything went wrong," he didn't add. But they both heard it anyway. They rode slowly down into the valley, giving anyone watching plenty of time to see them coming. Elias knew Jacob would have guards posted, would have seen their approach long before they reached the main house. He was proven right when 2 men on horseback emerged from behind the barn, rifles ready, but not quite aimed. "That's far enough," one of them shouted. "State your business." "I'm here to see Jacob Ward," Elias called back. "Tell him his brother's come calling." The 2 men exchanged glances, and one of them wheeled his horse and galloped toward the house. The other kept his rifle trained on them, his face suspicious. They waited in tense silence until the ranch house door opened and a figure emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the confident stride of a man who knew his own strength. Jacob Ward looked like an older, harder version of Elias. Same gray eyes, same strong jaw, but his face was more weathered, more lined with responsibility and judgment. He wore a sheepskin coat against the cold, and his expression when he saw Elias was everything his younger brother had feared: anger, disappointment, and beneath it all, a hurt that 5 years hadn't healed. "Elias," Jacob's voice was flat, carefully neutral. "Didn't expect to ever see you again." "I know. I wouldn't be here if I had any other choice." Elias dismounted, helping Nora down after him. "This is Nora Hale. She's in trouble, and she needs help. I need help." "You need help?" Jacob's laugh was bitter. "That's rich coming from you. Where were you when Ma was dying last year? Where were you when the ranch was struggling and I could have used an extra hand? You ride away 5 years ago and don't send so much as a letter. And now you show up needing help? Jacob, I know I don't deserve—" "You're right. You don't." Jacob's eyes were cold. "Sarah's dead because you couldn't follow the rules. Because you thought you knew better than the law, better than Pa, better than everyone. You killed her husband, murdered him in the street, and then you ran like a coward. Left me to deal with the consequences. Left Ma to grieve alone. And now you come here expecting— what? Forgiveness? Shelter? I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for her." Elias gestured to Nora. "She's running from a man who means to hurt her. All I need is a few days to figure out a plan, get her somewhere safe. After that, I'll leave and you'll never see me again. I promise." Jacob looked at Nora for the first time, really seeing her. She met his gaze steadily, her chin lifted with that same proud defiance that had first caught Elias's attention. Something in Jacob's expression softened, just a fraction. "What's your situation?" he asked her directly. "I was sold to a cattle rancher named Silas Croft," Nora said, her voice clear and strong. "I ran rather than marry him. He sent men to bring me back. Your brother has been helping me stay ahead of them." "Silas Croft?" Jacob's expression darkened. "I know that name. He's bad business, ruthless as they come. You picked a dangerous enemy, girl." "I didn't pick anything. I just refused to be property." Jacob studied her for another long moment, then let out a long breath and turned back to Elias. "You always did have a talent for finding trouble. Even when we were kids, you couldn't just let things be." "Sarah's death taught me something," Elias said quietly. "Taught me that letting things be can get people killed. I couldn't let that happen again. The name hung between them like a ghost. Jacob's jaw tightened, old pain and anger warring across his face. Finally, he shook his head and turned toward the house. I'll give you one night. One. You can sleep in the barn, get a hot meal, rest your horse. But come morning, you're gone. I won't have Croft's men coming here looking for you. I've got people depending on this ranch, and I won't risk them for your crusade. It wasn't welcome, but it wasn't rejection either. Elias nodded, accepting the terms. Thank you, Jacob. Don't thank me. Just be gone by dawn. Jacob walked back toward the house without another word, his back rigid with unresolved anger. One of the ranch hands showed them to the barn, where they could bed down in the loft. It was warmer than camping in the snow, at least, and the hay made for softer sleeping than frozen ground. As the hand left, Nora turned to Elias with troubled eyes. He hates you. He has reason to. Is it really your fault? What happened to Sarah? Elias was quiet for a long time, staring out the barn's open door at the ranch house where his brother lived, with all that righteous anger. I don't know anymore. I used to be sure. Sure it was the husband's fault, or Pa's for arranging the marriage, or the law's for allowing it. But maybe Jacob's right. Maybe if I'd just stayed in my place, done my job, Sarah would have found a way to survive. Maybe my interference made everything worse. Or maybe everyone failed her, Nora said softly. Your father for selling her, the law for protecting her husband. You for not acting soon enough. Your brother for not standing up to your father. Maybe there's enough blame to go around, and carrying it all yourself doesn't help anyone. Elias looked at Nora in the fading light filtering through the barn's rafters, and something in her words struck deeper than he expected. She was right, of course. Blame was a heavy thing, and he'd been carrying all of it for so long he'd forgotten how to set it down. But before he could respond, the barn door creaked open, and a woman's voice called out softly, Elias? Is that really you? He turned to see a figure silhouetted in the doorway, and recognition hit him like a physical blow. Margaret? Jacob's wife stepped into the barn, older than he remembered, but still carrying that quiet strength that had drawn his brother to her years ago. Her brown hair was streaked with gray now, pulled back in a practical bun, and her face showed the lines of someone who'd weathered hard seasons without breaking. She moved toward him slowly, as if approaching a ghost she wasn't quite sure was real. Lord above, it is you. Her voice trembled slightly. Jacob said you were here, but I had to see for myself. 5 years, Elias. 5 years without a word. I know. I'm sorry, Margaret. I didn't think I'd be welcome. You wouldn't have been, not after what happened. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes searching his face. But you're here now, and that girl with you looks half frozen and scared to death. Jacob can nurse his anger if he wants, but I won't have guests sleeping in a barn like animals. Come to the house. I've got stew on the stove and warm beds that are going to waste. Jacob says a lot of things when he's angry. I'm saying come eat dinner with us. Let him stew about it over his own plate. Margaret's expression softened as she looked at Nora. What's your name, dear? Nora Hale, ma'am. Well, Nora Hale, you look like you've been through hell and back. Come on inside where it's warm. We can sort out the rest later. She turned back to Elias. And you, wash up before you come to my table. You look like you've been sleeping in ditches. Yes, ma'am, Elias said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Margaret had always been the practical one, cutting through tension with direct action. It was one of the things he'd liked best about his sister-in-law. They followed her to the house, where warm lamplight spilled from the windows, and the smell of cooking food made Elias's stomach clench with hunger. Inside, the ranch house was exactly as he remembered, rough-hewn furniture built to last, a stone fireplace dominating one wall, shelves lined with books Margaret insisted on keeping despite Jacob's protests that ranchers had no use for poetry. It felt like stepping back in time, into a version of his life that had died the day he rode away. Jacob sat at the head of the table, his face darkening when he saw them enter. Margaret, don't start, his wife said firmly. They're eating with us, and that's final. You want to throw your brother out after, that's your business. But nobody leaves my house hungry, blood or not. For a moment, the tension hung thick enough to choke on. Then Jacob pushed back from the table with a scrape of wood on wood and stalked toward the door. I'll be in the barn checking on the mare. She's due to foal any day." The door slammed behind him, and Margaret sighed. "Don't mind him. His bark's worse than his bite. Always has been. Sit down, both of you. I'll get bowls." The stew was rich and hearty, thick with beef and vegetables that tasted like heaven after days of hardtack and dried meat. Nora ate with careful control, as if afraid to show how desperately hungry she was. But Elias saw her hands trembling around the spoon. Margaret noticed too, her expression turning maternal in that way women had when faced with someone in need of care. "When did you last have a proper meal?" Margaret asked gently. "I don't remember," Nora admitted. "Everything's been complicated." "I can imagine." Margaret refilled her bowl without asking. "Elias's telegram mentioned you were in trouble. Silas Croft trouble, from what I overheard. You know him?" "Know of him. He's been buying up land north of here, pushing out the smaller ranchers. Ruthless man, from all accounts." Margaret's eyes sharpened. "You were promised to him." "Sold to him, more accurately, by the pastor who raised me after my parents died." Nora's voice stayed steady, but Elias could hear the brittleness underneath. "I ran rather than go through with it." Margaret was quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached across the table and squeezed Nora's hand. "Good for you. Any man who has to buy a wife isn't worth having. You did the brave thing, running. Don't let anyone tell you different." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "Thank you." They finished dinner in relative quiet, the tension easing incrementally as Margaret kept up a steady stream of gentle conversation. She told them about the ranch, about the harsh winter they'd been having, about the new foal that was due any day. She didn't mention Sarah, didn't bring up the past, just offered the gift of normalcy for a brief moment. When the meal was finished, Margaret showed Nora to a small guest room at the back of the house. "There's a wash basin with warm water, clean clothes in the chest if you want to change. Get some rest. Tomorrow's troubles can wait until tomorrow." Nora looked back at Elias uncertainly, as if afraid to let him out of her sight. He gave her a small nod of reassurance. "Go on. I'll be here." After she'd gone, Margaret turned to Elias with an expression that was equal parts sympathy and exasperation. "What have you gotten yourself into this time?" "Long story." "I've got time." So Elias told her, sitting at the kitchen table while Margaret cleaned up the dinner dishes. He told her about finding Nora in the saloon, about the cabin, about the men who'd come hunting. He told her about the fear in Nora's eyes that reminded him so much of Sarah, and about the choice he'd made to help her, even though it meant trouble. Margaret listened without interrupting, her hands busy with the dishes, but her attention fully focused on his words. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window into the darkness. "You can't save her, you know," she finally said. "Not the way you're thinking. You can't use her to make up for failing Sarah. That's not fair to either of them." "I know that." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to rewrite history, trying to get a second chance to do it right this time." She turned to face him. "But life doesn't work that way, Elias. Sarah's gone. Helping Nora won't bring her back." "You think I don't know that?" The words came out sharper than he intended. "I think about Sarah every damn day. I see her face every time I close my eyes. I know I can't save her, but maybe I can save Nora. Maybe that counts for something." "Maybe it does. Or maybe you're just trading one kind of guilt for another." Margaret dried her hands on a towel and sat down across from him. "What happens when Nora's safe? When she doesn't need you anymore? What happens to you then?" Elias didn't have an answer for that because he hadn't thought that far ahead. His entire focus had been on keeping Nora alive, getting her to safety, protecting her from Croft's men. What came after? What happened when she could stand on her own? That was a question he'd been deliberately avoiding. "I'll figure it out when I get there," he said finally. "You always were terrible at planning ahead. Sarah used to say you lived entirely in the present moment, never thinking about consequences." Margaret's voice softened. "She loved you anyway, you know. Even after everything that happened, she never blamed you the way Jacob does." The words hit harder than any accusation. Elias felt his throat tighten. "How do you know that?" "Because she told me. 3 days before she died. She came here, showed me the bruises her husband had given her. asked if she could stay here, hide here. I wanted to let her, but Jacob, Margaret's voice broke slightly. Jacob said the law was clear, that interfering in a legal marriage was wrong, that we couldn't harbor another man's wife without cause. So we sent her back. The silence that followed was deafening. Elias stared at Margaret, seeing the guilt written across her face, and suddenly understood that he wasn't the only one carrying blame for Sarah's death. They all were. Every person who'd known and done nothing, who'd hidden behind law and propriety while a woman died. You never told Jacob, Elias said quietly, about her coming here. No, he knows she visited, but not why. He thinks she just came for tea. Margaret wiped at her eyes. I've carried that secret for 5 years, carried the knowledge that I could have saved her and chose not to. So when you show up here with another woman in trouble, running from another cruel man, I can't turn her away. Not again. I won't live with that guilt twice. Does that mean? It means she can stay as long as she needs. I'll handle Jacob. He'll bluster and rage, but he'll come around eventually. He always does. Margaret stood, collecting the last of the dishes. But you, Elias, you need to figure out what you're really doing here. Are you helping Nora because it's right, or because you're trying to save a ghost? Because if it's the latter, you're going to hurt that girl as sure as Croft would have, just in a different way. She left him alone with those words, and Elias sat in the quiet kitchen long after she'd gone, staring at his hands and wondering if she was right. Was he helping Nora for her sake, or for his own? Was this about justice, or was it just another way of punishing himself for sins that could never be absolved? The door opened and Jacob entered, bringing a blast of cold air with him. He stopped when he saw Elias still at the table, his expression hardening. Thought you'd be in the barn by now. Margaret invited us to stay in the house. Of course she did. Jacob hung up his coat with deliberate care. She's too soft-hearted for her own good, always has been. She's a good woman. You're lucky to have her. Don't presume to tell me about my own wife. Jacob moved to pour himself whiskey from a bottle on the shelf, not offering any to Elias. Why are you really here? And don't give me that story about helping a woman in distress. I know you, little brother. You've got an angle. No angle. I saw someone in trouble and I helped. That's all. That's never all with you. Jacob drank deeply, his eyes never leaving Elias's face. You killed a man 5 years ago because you couldn't follow the rules. Now you're harboring a runaway bride, fighting off bounty hunters, bringing trouble to my door. When are you going to learn that some fights aren't yours to fight? When are you going to learn that some fights are everyone's fight? Elias stood, his own temper rising. Sarah came here for help. Margaret told me. You sent her back to die. Jacob's face went white, then red. Margaret had no right. She had every right. You want to blame me for Sarah's death? Fine. But you carry some of that blame too, brother. You knew what kind of man she'd married. You saw the bruises. And you sent her back anyway because the law said that was right. Elias's voice dropped to something dangerous. So don't you dare stand there and lecture me about responsibility when you hid behind regulations while our sister died. For a moment, Elias thought Jacob might hit him. The older man's fists clenched, his jaw tight with fury. Then, slowly, the fight seemed to drain out of him, leaving only exhaustion and pain. Get out, Jacob said quietly. Get out of my house. Gladly. Elias grabbed his coat and headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I don't blame you for what happened to Sarah. I blame all of us. Pa, you, me, the law, the whole damn system that let it happen. But I'm done hiding behind blame. I'm done letting good people suffer because it's easier than standing up. If that makes me reckless or stupid or wrong, then so be it. At least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. He left Jacob standing alone in the kitchen and headed toward the guest room where Nora was staying. He needed to tell her they were leaving tonight, that they couldn't stay here after all. But when he reached the door, he heard soft crying from inside, and his hand froze on the handle. Nora? He called quietly. The crying stopped abruptly. Come in. She was sitting on the bed in borrowed nightclothes, her face blotchy from tears she'd tried to hide. When she saw him, she quickly wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. What's wrong? Elias asked, closing the door behind him. Nothing. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. A broken laugh escaped her. Margaret was kind. That's what's wrong. She was kind to me without wanting anything in return, and I don't know how to process that. Everyone always wants something: payment, obedience, gratitude, my body. But she just helped, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Elias moved to sit in the chair by the window, giving her space. That's what decent people do. They help because it's right, not because they expect payment. Are there really people like that? Or is Margaret the exception? I'd like to think there are more like her than not. We just tend to meet the wrong kind more often. Nora pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. In the lamplight, she looked impossibly young and vulnerable, nothing like the fierce woman who'd thrown a knife to save his life. I heard you and Jacob fighting. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the walls are thin. I figured. We weren't exactly quiet. He blames you for his sister's death. He's not wrong to. Elias leaned back in the chair, suddenly exhausted. I made choices that got Sarah killed. No amount of justification changes that. But he made choices too. You said he sent her back when she came here for help. Doesn't make my choices any less wrong. Nora was quiet for a moment, studying him in the dim light. You carry so much guilt. I can see it in your eyes, hear it in your voice. It's like you're waiting for punishment you think you deserve. Maybe I am. Then you're an idiot. Her words were gentle despite their bluntness. You can't punish yourself into redemption, Elias. You can't suffer enough to make up for past mistakes. All you can do is make better choices going forward. That's all any of us can do. When did you get so wise? Around the time I threw a knife through a man's chest to save your life. She smiled slightly. Killing someone changes your perspective. Makes you realize life's too short to waste on guilt that doesn't serve any purpose. You're not bothered by it anymore? The killing? Oh, I'm bothered. I see his face when I close my eyes, feel the weight of the knife in my hand. But I'm not sorry. There's a difference. She hugged her knees tighter. I'm bothered because taking a life should bother me. It should matter. But I'm not sorry because he was trying to hurt us, and I won't apologize for defending myself. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Elias felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. You're stronger than you think, Nora Hale. I'm learning to be. You're teaching me. Before he could respond to that, a knock sounded at the door and Margaret's voice called through. Elias, can you come out here? Jacob wants to talk to you. Elias exchanged a glance with Nora, then stood. I'll be back. Lock this door behind me and don't open it unless you hear my voice. Understand? You think something's wrong? I think I've learned not to take chances. He found Jacob and Margaret in the kitchen, and the tension between them suggested they'd been arguing. Jacob's face was set in hard lines, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Maybe regret. Maybe just exhaustion. Margaret tells me I'm being an ass, Jacob said, without preamble. You usually are when you're angry, Elias replied carefully. She also tells me Sarah came here before she died, that you knew, and I didn't. Jacob's voice was tight with controlled emotion. That true? Elias looked at Margaret, who nodded slightly. It's true. She asked to stay. We said no because the law... Because I said no, Jacob interrupted. Because I was too concerned with doing things by the book, too worried about what people would think if we harbored a married woman without her husband's permission. I sent her back to die, and I've spent 5 years blaming you for it instead of looking at my own part in it. The admission seemed to cost him, and Elias felt his anger drain away, leaving only the shared grief that had always been underneath. They were both guilty, both complicit, both carrying scars from choices that couldn't be unmade. We all failed her, Elias said quietly. You, me, Pa, the law, plenty of blame to go around. Margaret said something similar. Jacob poured 2 glasses of whiskey this time, sliding one across to Elias. She also said, I'm a stubborn fool if I let old anger drive you away when you're trying to do right by someone else. That this time we have a chance to do better. Do we? Maybe. If we stop blaming each other long enough to work together. Jacob picked up his glass but didn't drink yet. Your girl, Nora, she reminds me of Sarah. Same fire underneath the fear. Same refusal to just accept what life hands her. If Croft gets her back, he won't. I won't let that happen. How? You planning to fight every man he sends until one of them gets lucky? That's not a plan, that's a death wish. Jacob finally drank, grimacing at the burn. But if you had help, had resources, had somewhere safe to keep her while we figured out a real solution, that might work. Elias stared at his brother, hardly daring to hope. You're saying you'll help? I'm saying Margaret will kill me if I don't, and I'm more scared of her than I am of Silas Croft. A ghost of a smile touched Jacob's lips. Besides, you're right about one thing. I did send Sarah back when I should have protected her. I won't make that mistake twice. Your Nora can stay here as long as she needs. We'll figure out how to keep her safe from Croft together. She's not my Nora, Elias said automatically, but even as the words left his mouth, he wondered if they were true. When had she become something more than just a woman he was helping? When had her safety become personal rather than just a matter of principle? Margaret smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Jacob raised his glass in a rough salute. To second chances, then, and to doing better this time. They drank, and for the first time in 5 years, Elias felt like maybe, just maybe, he and his brother could find their way back to something like family. The next morning brought disaster. Elias woke to the sound of wind howling with a ferocity that made the cabin walls shake. He stumbled to the window and his heart sank. A blizzard had moved in overnight, turning the world into a whiteout of driving snow and screaming wind. Visibility was maybe 10 feet, if that. Nothing was moving out in that storm, which meant they were trapped here until it passed, which also meant if Croft's men were nearby, they were trapped here too. The thought sent ice down Elias's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. He found Jacob in the kitchen, staring out the window with a grim expression. How bad? Elias asked. Bad as I've seen in 20 years. We'll be lucky if we don't lose livestock. The men are moving everything they can into the barns, but visibility's so poor they're having trouble finding their way back to the house. Jacob turned to face him. We're stuck here for at least 2 days, maybe 3. Hope you and your girl are comfortable. We'll manage. Elias poured himself coffee, his mind already working through contingencies. What about security? Can your men watch the approaches? In this? Can't see more than a few feet. Anyone could walk right up to the house, and we wouldn't know until they knocked on the door. Jacob's expression darkened. You thinking Croft's men might come? I'm thinking they're not going to stop just because of weather. If they tracked us this far, then we're sitting ducks until this storm breaks. Jacob cursed under his breath. All right, I'll post men at the doors, keep rifles ready. But if they come in force, we're in trouble. This house wasn't built to withstand a siege. Nora emerged from the guest room looking pale and worried. I heard the wind. How bad is it? Bad enough that we're trapped here for a few days, Elias told her. But we'll be all right. Jacob's posting guards. Because of me. Because Croft's men might come. Her voice was small. Maybe I should just go. Turn myself in. Stop putting everyone else in danger. Absolutely not, Margaret said firmly, emerging from the bedroom she shared with Jacob. That's fear talking, not sense. You go out in that storm, you'll freeze to death in an hour. And even if you didn't, turning yourself over to those men would be the same as signing your own death warrant. You stay put and let the menfolk do the worrying. Despite everything, Nora smiled slightly. The menfolk? Well, someone has to. Lord knows they enjoy it so much. Margaret moved to start breakfast, her movements brisk and practical. Now, everyone sit down and eat. Can't face trouble on an empty stomach. The day passed in tense waiting. The storm continued its assault, and the house felt smaller with each passing hour. Elias found himself hyper-aware of every sound, every gust of wind, every creak of timber, every noise that might be footsteps approaching. His hand stayed near his gun, and he caught Jacob doing the same. Nora tried to help Margaret with household tasks, clearly needing something to occupy her mind. She mended clothes, helped with cooking, cleaned already clean surfaces. Elias watched her work and thought about what Margaret had said, that he was using Nora to make up for failing Sarah. Was that true? Or was something else happening here? Something he wasn't quite ready to name. That evening, after a quiet dinner, Nora asked if she could speak with Elias privately. They retreated to the small room she was staying in, and she closed the door behind them with obvious nervousness. What is it? Elias asked. I've been thinking about what happens after this. After we get away from Croft. After I'm safe. She twisted her hands together, not meeting his eyes. Where do I go? What do I do? I have no money, no family, no prospects. Even if I get away, what kind of life am I running toward? We'll figure it out. Maybe teaching, like you wanted. Or, Elias, stop. She looked up at him then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Stop planning my future like you're responsible for it. I'm grateful for your help, more grateful than I can ever express. But I need to know, what am I to you? Am I a duty? A way to make up for your sister? Or am I something else? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Elias opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again, realizing he didn't know what to say. What was she to him? When had she stopped being a woman in need of rescue and become someone whose opinion mattered, whose presence he looked forward to, whose absence would leave a hole he couldn't fill? I don't know, he finally admitted. I started helping you because it was the right thing to do, because you reminded me of Sarah and I couldn't fail again. But now, he struggled to find words for feelings he'd been avoiding. Now, when I think about you leaving, about you building a life somewhere I'm not, it feels wrong, like I'd be losing something important. That's not an answer. I know, but it's the truth. He moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. You scare me, Nora. Not because of the danger you bring, but because you make me feel things I thought died with my sister. Hope, purpose. The possibility that maybe I'm not just a broken man with a gun, that maybe I could be something more. Nora's breath caught. Elias, I can't promise you anything. I'm still figuring out how to live with myself, still carrying guilt that won't quit. But I know that when you're near, the weight feels lighter. When you smile, I remember what it felt like before everything went wrong. And when I think about you going somewhere I can't follow, it hurts in a way I don't have words for. That sounds like more than duty, she whispered. It is more than duty. It's... He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the touch careful and questioning. It's whatever this is between us. This thing I don't know how to name. Nora leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, they held a determination that made his breath catch. I don't want to be a virgin tonight. The words were so unexpected, so direct, that Elias actually took a step back. What? You heard me. Her voice trembled but didn't break. I'm 23 years old. I was sold to a man I didn't choose, run from a marriage I didn't want, hunted like an animal. I've killed to stay alive. And through all of it, this one thing, my virginity, has been treated like it's the most valuable thing about me, like it's what makes me worth protecting or worth buying or worth anything. Nor you don't have to. I know I don't have to. That's the point. She moved closer to him, her chin lifted in that familiar, defiant gesture. Every other man has treated my body like their property, something to be bought or taken or protected for their own purposes. But you've never once made me feel like you wanted that from me. You've given me choices, respected my boundaries, seen me as a person first. So I'm choosing. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what happens to my body. And I'm choosing you. Elias felt torn between desire and responsibility, between what he wanted and what he thought was right. You're scared. This is the fear talking, trying to take control of something in a situation where you have no control. Maybe it is. Or maybe it's me finally realizing that if I'm going to give this to someone, it should be on my terms, with someone who sees me as more than just a transaction. Her eyes searched his face. Unless you don't want, it's not about wanting. His voice came out rougher than he intended. God, Nora, of course I want... He stopped, taking a breath to steady himself. But I don't want you to do this because you're grateful or scared or trying to prove something. That's not how this should happen. Then how should it happen? It should happen when you're sure. When you're doing it because you want to, not because you're afraid of dying without experiencing it. When you're choosing me because I'm who you want, not just because I'm here and I've been kind to you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. What if I am sure? What if I do want you? Just once, Elias. I want someone to care instead of hurt. Just once. I want to know what it feels like when it's a choice instead of a transaction or a duty. He was crumbling, the walls he'd built around his heart developing cracks he couldn't patch. Nora, tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me there's nothing between us, that I'm imagining this connection. Tell me I'm just a duty to you, someone you're helping out of guilt, and I'll walk away. I'll never mention it again. She stepped closer, so close he could feel the warmth of her breath. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, if there's any part of you that wants this too, then please, please don't make me beg. Elias stared into her eyes and saw everything reflected there, fear and hope and desire and trust all tangled together. She was offering herself to him not from desperation, but from a fierce need to claim her own choices, her own body, her own future. And he realized that denying her wasn't protecting her. It was taking away the very agency he'd been fighting to give her. He crossed to the door in 3 long strides, and for a moment Nora's face fell, thinking he was leaving. Then he slid the bar into place with a quiet thud, shutting out the world. The sound of it, of that simple barrier between them and everything else, seemed to echo in the small room. When he turned back to her, his eyes held a question. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He moved toward her slowly, giving her time to change her mind, time to pull away. But she didn't retreat. Instead, she reached up and touched his face with trembling fingers, tracing the line of his jaw, the scar above his eyebrow, memorizing him with her touch. "I'm not good at this," Elias said quietly. "At gentleness, at knowing what to say or do. But I promise you this. I will never hurt you, not intentionally, not ever. I know. That's why I chose you." Their first kiss was tentative, questioning, a conversation without words, asking and asking again. Then it deepened into something fierce and necessary. 5 days of tension and fear and unspoken feelings pouring out in the desperate press of lips and hands and bodies seeking warmth. Elias was careful, so careful, his hands mapping her body with reverent attention, asking permission with every touch. And Nora answered with touches of her own, exploring the hard planes of his chest, the scars that told stories of violence survived, the proof that he was real and solid and here. They moved to the bed, shedding clothes between kisses, and when they finally came together, it was slow and tender and raw. Not the violent taking she'd been conditioned to expect, but a mutual giving that felt like healing. There was some pain, inevitable and brief, but Elias gentled her through it with whispered reassurances and patient stillness until the pain faded and pleasure bloomed in its place. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, listening to the storm rage outside while their breathing slowly returned to normal. Nora's head rested on his chest, and she could hear his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me, for giving me this choice, for being gentle when you could have just taken." She tilted her head to look up at him. "For caring." Elias pulled her closer, his arms a shield against everything that waited beyond this moment. "I do care. More than I should, probably. More than is smart. Is that a problem?" "It complicates things. Makes me vulnerable in ways I haven't been since Sarah died." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "But I think maybe I needed to be vulnerable again. Needed to remember what it felt like to care about someone's happiness more than my own guilt." They drifted into sleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time in years, Elias didn't dream about Sarah's funeral. Instead, he dreamed of spring, of new beginnings, of a future that might hold more than just running and violence and regret. When dawn came, it brought silence. The storm had finally broken, leaving the world buried under feet of fresh snow, but clear and calm. Elias woke first, careful not to disturb Nora, and went to the window. The sun was rising, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, and for a moment everything felt possible. Then he saw them. 3 riders emerging from the tree line, moving slowly through the deep snow toward the ranch house. Even at a distance, Elias could see the rifles across their saddles, the deliberate way they approached. More of Croft's men come to finish what the first group had started. The moment of peace shattered like ice under a hammer. Elias turned to wake Nora, his hand already reaching for his gun, and felt the weight of what was coming settle onto his shoulders like a physical thing. They'd had one night of grace, one moment of choosing love over fear. Now reality was here to collect its due, and Elias Ward would have to decide how far he was willing to go to protect the woman he was beginning to realize he couldn't live without. The riders were maybe 200 yards out when Elias's hand found Nora's shoulder, gentle but urgent. She woke instantly, her body tensing with the awareness of someone who'd learned to sleep lightly, always ready for danger. "Get dressed," he said quietly. "We've got company." She was up and moving before he finished the sentence, pulling on clothes with practiced efficiency while Elias checked his rifle and pistol. The intimacy of the night before seemed like a dream now, something soft and fragile that couldn't survive in the harsh light of morning. But when their eyes met across the small room, something passed between them, a wordless acknowledgement that whatever they'd started last night was worth fighting for. Jacob was already in the main room when they emerged, his own rifle in hand, his face grim. "Saw them from the bedroom window. 3 riders, all armed. They're not trying to hide it either." "How long until they reach the house?" Elias asked. 10 minutes, maybe 15 in this snow. I've sent 2 of my men to the barn to flank them if it comes to shooting." Jacob glanced at Nora. "You know how to use a gun?" "Elias taught me the basics." "Good. Margaret's getting you one anyway. If this goes bad, you shoot anyone who isn't us. Don't hesitate, don't think, just shoot." He turned back to Elias. "They'll probably want to talk first. Croft's not stupid. He won't want to start a range war if he can avoid it. But if they try to take her by force, then we stop them. Whatever it takes." Elias's voice was flat, final. He'd already made his choice about how far he was willing to go, and it was all the way. "You don't have to risk your men for this, Jacob. This is my fight." "The hell it is. Those bastards came onto Wardland with guns. That makes it my fight too." Jacob worked the lever on his rifle, chambering around. "Besides, I already failed one woman who needed help. I won't do it again." Margaret appeared with a shotgun for Nora and another rifle for herself. "I can shoot as well as any man here, so don't even think about telling me to hide in the back room." "Wouldn't dream of it," Jacob said, and despite the tension, there was affection in his voice. "Just stay behind cover and don't take chances." They positioned themselves strategically, Jacob and Elias at the front windows, Margaret and Nora at the sides where they could provide covering fire if needed. The 2 ranch hands were invisible in the barn, but Elias knew they'd be watching, waiting for his signal. The riders approached slowly, their horses struggling through snow that came up to their chests. They stopped about 50 yards from the house, close enough to talk, but far enough to make accurate shooting difficult. The man in the center was big, broad-shouldered, with a beard that couldn't hide the cruel set of his mouth. His companions flanked him on either side, younger men with the nervous energy of those spoiling for a fight. "Jacob Ward," the bearded man called out, "we're here on behalf of Silas Croft. We don't want trouble with you, but we've got business that needs settling." Jacob stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held casual but ready. Elias stayed inside, positioned where he could shoot through the window if necessary. "You're on my land, McCready. That gives me the right to ask your business." So Jacob knew this man. Elias filed that information away, watching the way McCready sat his horse. Confident, arrogant, the bearing of someone used to getting his way through intimidation. "You know my business. You're harboring Nora Hale, property of Mr. Croft by legal contract. We're here to collect her and bring her home." McCready's voice carried clearly across the snow. "Now we can do this peaceful-like, or we can do it hard. Your choice." "She's not property, and she's not going anywhere." Jacob's voice was steady, unbending as iron. "Croft's got no legal claim here. The woman ran from an arrangement she didn't consent to. That makes her a free person under territorial law. That's not how Mr. Croft sees it. He paid good money for her. Then he wasted his money. You can ride back and tell him that. Or you can try to take her by force and see how that works out for you." Jacob shifted his stance slightly, and suddenly there were rifles visible in the barn windows behind McCready and his men. "But I should warn you, you're surrounded, outgunned, and on my land. The only way this ends well for you is if you turn around and ride away." McCready's face darkened with anger, but he wasn't stupid enough to miss the tactical situation he'd walked into. "This isn't over, Ward. Croft's got reach you can't imagine. He's got judges, lawmen, politicians. He'll come at you legal-like, and you won't have a leg to stand on." "I'll let him try. Now get off my property before I have my men shoot your horses out from under you." For a long moment, McCready didn't move, his hand resting near his gun, clearly calculating whether he could take the shot before Jacob's men cut him down. Then slowly, he turned his horse and gestured to his companions. "This isn't finished. You're protecting a criminal, Ward. That makes you complicit. I can live with that. Question is, can you live with riding back to Croft empty-handed again?" The threat hung in the air like smoke. McCready's face went red, but he kicked his horse into motion, and his men followed. They rode back the way they'd come, slower than they'd arrived, humiliation obvious in every line of their posture. Jacob stayed on the porch until they disappeared into the tree line, then let out a breath he'd been holding. "That was too easy." "Way too easy," Elias agreed, emerging from the house. "He gave up without a fight. Why?" "Because he's not the real threat. He was just testing our defenses, seeing how serious we are about protecting her." Jacob turned to look at Elias. "The real assault comes next, and it'll be bigger, meaner. Croft's going to come at us with everything he's got. Then we need to move Nora somewhere safer, somewhere Croft can't reach." "There is nowhere Croft can't reach. Not in this territory." Jacob's expression was grim. "But there might be a way to end this that doesn't involve more bloodshed. We need to go to the territorial marshal, make a formal complaint, get legal protection for Nora. The marshal's 3 days' ride from here, and Croft probably owns him anyway," Elias said flatly. "We'd be delivering Nora right into his hands." "Maybe. Or maybe we'd be forcing Croft to follow legal channels instead of sending hired guns. It's worth trying." They argued about it through breakfast, voices rising and falling while Nora sat silent, picking at her food. Finally, she set down her fork with enough force to make them both stop talking. "I'm right here," she said quietly. "Stop talking about me like I'm not. Stop planning my life like I don't get a say." "We're trying to keep you safe," Elias said. "By doing what? Running forever? Fighting every man Croft sends until one of you dies?" Her voice shook with emotion. "I won't live like that. I won't be responsible for good people dying because I dared to say no to a man who thinks he owns me." "So what do you want to do?" Jacob asked. Nora took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I want to face him. I want to go to Copper Falls, stand in front of Silas Croft, and tell him to his face that I'm not his property. I want witnesses, legal documents, everything done publicly so he can't just make me disappear. And if that doesn't work," she looked at Elias, "then at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have fought for myself instead of letting others fight for me." "That's suicide," Elias said immediately. "Croft will have you arrested the moment you step foot in Copper Falls. You'll disappear into his ranch, and no one will ever see you again. Not if I go with the territorial marshal. Not if I make my case publicly, with witnesses who can testify to what Croft really is." Nora's jaw set with determination. "Jacob's right. We need to force this into the legal system. Make it public enough that Croft can't just use violence to solve his problem. And if the legal system is as corrupt as we think, then at least we'll know. At least we'll have tried." She reached across the table and took Elias's hand. "I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. I want to fight back, but I want to do it smart. Will you help me?" Elias looked into her eyes and saw the same fierce determination that had drawn him to her in the first place. She wasn't asking to be saved anymore. She was asking for backup while she saved herself. How could he deny her that? "All right," he said finally. "We'll go to the marshal. But we do it my way, carefully, with plans for everything that could go wrong. And if it looks like a trap, we run. No heroics, no last stands. Agreed?" "Agreed." They spent the rest of the day planning. Jacob sent one of his ranch hands to town to gather information about the territorial marshal. Was he honest? Was he on Croft's payroll? Could he be trusted? The man returned that evening with mixed news. Marshal Hendricks was known to be mostly honest, but he was also practical. He wouldn't stick his neck out without solid evidence and good reason. "We need documentation," Margaret said, ever practical. "Letters, witnesses, something that proves Nora was coerced into this arrangement, something that shows Croft's true nature." "I have letters," Nora said quietly, "from before I ran. Letters from the pastor who raised me, discussing the arrangement with Croft. Letters that make it clear I had no say in the matter, that I was being sold like cattle. She looked up, her eyes hard. I took them when I ran. They're in my carpet bag, sewn into the lining. I thought maybe someday they'd be useful. Smart girl, Jacob said approvingly. Those letters could make the difference. Written evidence that you were forced into this, that you had no legal consent. That's something even a corrupt marshal has to take seriously. They left 2 days later, after the snow had settled enough to make travel possible. Jacob insisted on coming with them, along with 2 of his best men. Safety in numbers, he said, and if Croft tries anything, I want witnesses from my ranch who can testify to what really happened. The ride to town was tense, every shadow a potential threat, every sound of horses a possible ambush. But they made it without incident, and by late afternoon they were riding into the territorial capital of Helena, a bustling town that seemed impossibly civilized after weeks in the wilderness. The marshal's office was a small building near the courthouse, and Marshal Hendricks was exactly what Elias expected. Middle-aged, weathered, with the careful neutral expression of a man who'd learned not to make judgments until he'd heard all sides. He listened to their story without interrupting, his face giving nothing away. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. That's quite a tale, Miss Hale. You got any proof? Nora produced the letters with hands that only trembled slightly. Hendricks read through them slowly, his expression darkening as he absorbed the contents. When he finished, he set them down carefully. These are damning, he said finally. Clear evidence that you were coerced into this arrangement, that your guardian acted without your consent. Under territorial law, that makes the contract void. Hope flared in Nora's chest. So you'll help me? You'll protect me from Croft? I can issue a protective order, yes. But here's the problem. Croft's got money and influence. He'll fight this in court, drag it out for years if he has to. And in the meantime, you'll be looking over your shoulder every day, wondering if today's the day his men find you. Hendricks leaned forward. What you really need is to make this so public, so documented, that Croft has no choice but to back down. And I think I know how to do that. How? Elias asked suspiciously. There's a circuit judge arriving in 3 days, Judge Morrison from Denver. She's got a reputation for being incorruptible, and she's presiding over a session here in Helena. If we can get your case on her docket, get it heard publicly with witnesses and documentation, she'll rule in your favor. And once there's a legal ruling from a territorial judge, even Croft will have to respect it. Otherwise, he'll be in contempt of court, and that's something even his money can't buy his way out of. It was better than Elias had hoped for, but he still didn't trust it. And in those 3 days, while we're waiting for this judge, what's to stop Croft from taking Nora by force? I'll keep her in protective custody. She can stay in the rooms above the jail. They're secure, and I'll have deputies watching around the clock. Hendricks saw Elias's expression and held up a hand. I know how that sounds, but it's the safest option. If she's in my custody, Croft can't touch her without committing a federal crime, and that's something even he won't risk. Nora looked at Elias, silently asking his opinion. He wanted to say no, wanted to grab her and run and keep running until Croft couldn't find them. But he also knew she was right. Running wasn't living. At some point, they had to stand and fight, and this might be their best chance. All right, he said finally, but I stay close. I want to be able to see those rooms, make sure she's really safe. Fair enough? There's a boarding house across the street. You can take a room there. Keep watch. Hendricks stood and extended his hand. I'll do everything I can to keep her safe, Mr. Ward. You have my word on that. They shook hands, but Elias didn't let go immediately. If anything happens to her, if Croft gets to her while she's in your custody, I will hold you personally responsible, and I don't mean legally. Hendricks met his eyes without flinching. Understood, but nothing's going to happen to her, not on my watch. The rooms above the jail were sparse but clean, with a window that looked out over the main street and a solid door with a lock. Nora explored them with a mixture of relief and apprehension, while Elias checked every possible entry point, every angle of attack. It's safe, he finally admitted. About as safe as we're going to get. Then why do you look like you're attending a funeral? Because I don't like leaving you here. Don't like not being able to protect you myself. Nora moved close to him, close enough that he could smell the soap she'd used that morning, could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. You've protected me every day since we met, But this isn't something you can shoot your way out of. This is something I have to do myself, stand up in front of a judge and claim my own freedom. You've given me the strength to do that. Now trust me to see it through." "I do trust you. It's everyone else I don't trust." She smiled and kissed him, quick and fierce. 3 days. We can survive 3 days. And then this will be over, and we can figure out what comes next. What do you want to come next? The question hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said, everything they'd been too afraid or too busy surviving to acknowledge. Nora took a breath, gathering courage. "I want a life where I'm not running, where I can teach, or sew, or do whatever I choose without looking over my shoulder, where I can walk down a street without being afraid someone's going to recognize me." She paused. "And I want you in that life, if you want to be there." Elias felt something unlock in his chest, something that had been closed since Sarah died. "I want that too, more than I've wanted anything in a long time." They kissed again, longer this time, pouring into it all the fear and hope and desperate longing of two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and discovered something worth holding on to. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. 3 days, Nora repeated, "and then we start over, together." "Together," Elias agreed. He left reluctantly, taking a room in the boarding house across the street where he could watch the jail. Jacob and his men took rooms nearby, creating a perimeter of friendly eyes. That first night passed without incident, but Elias barely slept, jerking awake at every sound, his hand reaching for his gun at shadows that turned out to be nothing. The second day brought disaster. Elias was in the general store buying supplies when the commotion started. Shouts from the street, the sound of horses, and underneath it all, a woman's scream that made his blood run cold. He dropped everything and ran, his gun already in his hand. The scene that met him was chaos. The jail's front door hung open, splintered where someone had battered it in. Marshal Hendricks lay on the floor inside, blood pooling from a head wound, and Nora was being dragged down the street by 3 men on horseback, her hands bound, her mouth gagged, her eyes wide with terror. Elias didn't think. He ran after them, firing as he ran. His first shot took down one of the horses. His second hit one of the riders in the shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle. The third man released Nora and wheeled his horse around, drawing his own gun. Time seemed to slow. Elias saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the barrel swing toward him, knew he wasn't going to be fast enough to avoid the shot. Then there was an explosion of sound from behind him, and the rider jerked backward, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. Elias spun to see Jacob standing in the street, rifle still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. "I've got your back, little brother. Get the girl." Nora had scrambled to her feet and was running toward them, her bound hands making her awkward. Elias caught her, cutting through the ropes with his knife, pulling the gag from her mouth. She was sobbing, gasping for air, her whole body shaking. "I've got you," he said fiercely. "I've got you. You're safe." But they weren't safe. More riders were coming. Elias could hear them, could see dust rising at the end of the street. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. "The church!" Jacob shouted. "It's stone, defensible. Move!" They ran, half carrying Nora between them, Jacob's men providing covering fire as more of Croft's riders poured into the street. The church was only 100 yards away, but it felt like miles. Bullets whined past them, chewing splinters from the buildings they passed. One of Jacob's men went down with a cry, clutching his leg. The other one grabbed him, dragging him forward. They burst through the church doors and Jacob slammed them shut, dropping the bar into place. The building was solid stone, built to last, with windows high enough to make accurate shooting difficult. It was a fortress of sorts. But it was also a trap. "How many men does Croft have out there?" Elias asked, moving to a window. "I counted at least 8, probably more coming." Jacob was already reloading his rifle, his movements automatic. "We can hold them off for a while, but eventually they'll either burn us out or wait until we run out of ammunition. Then we need help. Someone needs to get to the marshal's office, get word to the federal authorities." "On it." One of Jacob's men, a young cowhand named Tommy, moved toward the back door. "There's an alley behind the church. If I'm fast, I can make it to the telegraph office." "Do it." "And Tommy?" Elias caught his eye. "Be careful. Croft's men will be watching for runners." Tommy nodded and slipped out the back door, disappearing into the maze of buildings behind the church. Elias watched him go and prayed silently that the kid would make it, because if he didn't, they were all dead. Outside, Croft's men were organizing. Elias could see them gathering in the street, could hear their leader, McCready from the ranch, shouting orders. They were preparing for an assault, and there wasn't a damn thing Elias could do but wait and prepare to sell their lives as expensively as possible. Nora sat huddled against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself, still shaking from the abduction. Margaret had appeared from somewhere and was wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, murmuring soft reassurances. Elias wanted to go to her, wanted to hold her and tell her everything would be all right. But he couldn't lie to her like that. Things were very far from all right. "Elias Ward!" McCready's voice boomed from outside. "You've got nowhere to run now. Send out the girl, and maybe we let the rest of you live." "Go to hell, McCready!" Elias shouted back. "Your choice. But when we come in there, and we will come in there, we won't be gentle about it. A lot of people are going to die because you're too stubborn to accept reality. That girl belongs to Silas Croft. You can't change that. She doesn't belong to anyone but herself. Pretty words. Won't stop bullets." There was a pause, then McCready's voice took on a different tone. "Mr. Croft wants me to give you a message, Ward. He says you remind him of himself when he was young. Stubborn, idealistic, willing to fight for what you believe in. He respects that. So he's willing to make you an offer. Walk away now, leave the girl, and he'll pay you $10,000. That's enough to start over anywhere you want. Enough to buy a ranch, a business, a whole new life. All you gotta do is stop fighting for something that was never yours in the first place." $10,000. It was a fortune, more money than Elias had ever seen. Enough to do everything McCready said and more. For a moment, just a moment, he let himself imagine it. Taking the money, walking away, leaving all this violence and fear behind. Then he looked at Nora, still trembling against the wall, her eyes wide with the terror of almost being taken back to a man who would hurt her. And he thought about Sarah, about all the people who'd walked away when she needed them, who'd chosen the easy path over the right one. "Tell Croft he can take his money and choke on it," Elias called back. "Nora's not for sale, and neither am I." A long silence. Then, "So be it. You chose this, Ward. Remember that when the bullets start flying." The first assault came 10 minutes later. 6 men rushed the church doors, trying to batter them down with a log they'd found. Elias and Jacob fired through the windows, dropping 2 of them before the others fell back. The wounded men were dragged away by their companions, leaving trails of blood in the snow. "They're testing our defenses," Jacob said grimly. "Next time, they'll come harder." He was right. The second assault was more coordinated. Men attacking from multiple directions, providing covering fire for each other. Elias shot until his rifle was empty, then switched to his pistol. The air filled with gun smoke and the thunder of weapons firing. One of the church windows shattered, spraying glass across the interior. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The shooting ceased and an eerie quiet descended. Elias risked a look outside and saw why. Marshal Hendricks was staggering down the street, one hand pressed to his bleeding head, the other holding a shotgun. Behind him came a dozen men, all armed, all wearing deputy badges. "This ends now, McCready," Hendricks shouted, his voice weak but determined. "You and your men are under arrest for assault, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Drop your weapons." McCready's response was to raise his rifle. "We're acting on behalf of Silas Croft, and we have every legal right to—" "You have no rights here. That girl is under court protection, and you just violated a federal order." Hendricks raised his shotgun. "I said drop your weapons." For a moment, it could have gone either way. The 2 groups faced each other in the snowy street, fingers on triggers, each waiting for the other to make a move. Then, from somewhere in the back of Croft's group, someone broke and ran. That was all it took. The others scattered like birds, mounting their horses and fleeing in all directions. Only McCready held his ground, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Croft will have his due. One way or another." "Maybe so. But today, you lost." Hendricks gestured with his shotgun. "Now get out of my town before I arrest you for the coward you are." McCready spat in the snow, then climbed onto his horse and rode away slowly, his back rigid with fury. The deputies moved forward to secure the scene, and Hendricks stumbled toward the church. Jacob met him at the door, helping him inside. "You all right, Marshal?" "Been better. They caught me by surprise, knocked me out cold. When I came to, they were already dragging Miss Hale away." He looked at Nora with genuine regret. "I'm sorry. I promised to keep you safe, and I failed." "You came back," Nora said quietly. "You could have stayed down, let them take me. But you got up, and you came back. That's more than most people would have done." Hendricks nodded, then turned to Elias. "I sent Tommy to the telegraph office before all this started. He got word to Judge Morrison about what happened. She's coming early, arriving tomorrow instead of next week. She wants to hear your case immediately, with full federal authority." He managed a pained smile. "Looks like Croft just gave us everything we need to bury him." His men assaulted a federal marshal and violated a court order in front of dozens of witnesses. That's going to be hard to explain away. Relief flooded through Elias so intensely it made his knees weak. They'd survived. Against all odds, they'd survived. He looked at Nora and saw the same realization dawning on her face. This nightmare might actually have an end. "Thank you," Elias said to Hendricks, "for coming back, for not giving up. Just doing my job. Though I'll admit there was a moment when I was lying on that floor, bleeding, when I thought about just staying down. Then I thought about that girl's face when they dragged her away, and I remembered why I took this badge in the first place." He accepted Margaret's help sitting down. Sometimes the job is more than just enforcing the law. Sometimes it's about doing what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. "You taught me that today, Ward. Both of you." The next day, Judge Morrison arrived in Helena like an avenging angel. She was in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, and she listened to Nora's testimony with an attention that suggested she heard not just the words, but everything underneath them. She read the letters, questioned witnesses, and examined the evidence with methodical precision. When she finally rendered her verdict, her voice carried through the packed courtroom with absolute authority. "I find that the contract between Silas Croft and Pastor Michaels was entered into without the consent of Nora Hale, who was not a legal party to said contract. Under territorial law, a person cannot be sold or traded without their explicit consent. This contract is therefore void, and Miss Hale is free of any obligation to Mr. Croft. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order against Mr. Croft and his employees. Any attempt to contact, threaten, or harm Miss Hale will result in immediate federal prosecution." The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the room. Nora stood frozen, as if unable to believe it was real. Then, slowly, the truth sank in. She was free. Truly, legally free. She turned to Elias, and he saw tears streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of fear or pain. These were tears of relief, of joy, of a burden finally lifted. He moved to her and pulled her into his arms, holding her while she sobbed against his chest, years of terror and helplessness finally releasing. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's really over." "I'm free," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Elias, I'm free." "You were always free. The judge just made it official." They stayed in Helena for another week while the paperwork was finalized, and Nora gave depositions about everything that had happened. Croft never appeared. He sent lawyers instead, who tried every legal maneuver they could think of to overturn the judgment. But Judge Morrison was unmoved. And eventually, even Croft's lawyers had to admit defeat. On their last night in Helena, Elias and Nora stood on the balcony of their boarding house room, looking out over the town. Snow was falling again, soft and gentle, covering everything in a blanket of white that felt less like winter and more like a fresh start. "What do we do now?" Nora asked. "Where do we go?" "Anywhere you want. World's open to you now." She was quiet for a moment, then turned to look at him. "I want to go back to Jacob's ranch, help Margaret with teaching the ranch children. Build something real, something that matters. And I want you there with me. Not as my protector or my savior, but as my partner. As someone who chooses to be there because he wants to be, not because he has to be." Elias felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You sure?" "I'm not an easy man, Nora. I've got ghosts that won't quit and guilt that may never fully go away. I know. I've got my own ghosts too. We can carry them together. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. You gave me my freedom. Let me give you something in return. A future. A life that's more than just running and fighting and trying to make up for the past. A life where we choose each other every day, not out of obligation or guilt, but because we want to. I want that, Elias said, and realized as he said it that it was the truest thing he'd spoken in years. I want that more than anything. They kissed as the snow fell around them, two broken people who'd found each other in the darkness and discovered that maybe, just maybe, broken things could heal if given enough time and care and love. The past couldn't be changed. Sarah would always be dead, and that guilt would always be part of him.